Hold a seed in your hand and describe only what your senses report. It is small, dry, inert. Nothing about its surface suggests a root system, a stem, a flower. And yet the seed already contains an organized potential that its surface does not reveal. The plant is not added to the seed later. In some sense, it is already there, unseen. Steiner believed ordinary perception stopped too early. He believed a person could train their attention until the seed's hidden future became something closer to observed fact than inferred guess. Not through fantasy, but through a disciplined form of thinking he considered a genuine organ of perception, one most people simply never develop. This claim sits at the center of everything Steiner built. He is usually introduced as the founder of Waldorf schools, or as a figure who drifted out of Theosophy into his own occult system. Those descriptions are accurate, but they miss the idea that held the rest of his work together. Steiner's claim was narrower and stranger, that thinking itself, refined enough, stops being a private mental event and becomes a way of perceiving things that ordinary consciousness filters out. He arrived at this by way of Goethe. As a young scholar, Steiner was given the task of editing Goethe's scientific writings, work that occupied him for the better part of a decade at the Goethe-Schiller archive in Weimar. Goethe had studied plants and color, not by breaking them into isolated mechanical parts, but by attending closely to the living form itself, the way a single plant type expresses itself differently across changing conditions, while remaining recognizably one thing. Goethe called the underlying pattern behind this variation the Urpflanze, the archetypal plant, not a fixed template stamped onto every species, but a formative principle a trained eye might learn to see working itself out differently in the leaf, the stem, and the flower. Steiner took this as evidence that perception could be trained toward wholes that ordinary analytical thinking discards. If Goethe could learn to see the underlying formative pattern behind a plant's many appearances, Steiner concluded that human cognition in general was not fixed at its ordinary sensory level. It could be developed further, deliberately, in stages. Steiner described 3 such stages. The first he called imagination, and the word is a source of constant confusion, because he meant something close to its opposite. Ordinary imagination invents freely. Steiner's imagination is a disciplined perception of forms that carry meaning precisely because they are not invented at will. A student might spend months holding a single symbolic image steadily in the mind, not elaborating on it, not associating freely, simply sustaining it until the image is no longer experienced merely as a voluntarily produced picture, but as a vehicle for content the practitioner believes is being perceived. Beyond imagination, he placed inspiration, in which the practitioner learns to set aside even the images themselves and attend to a kind of content he described as arriving without pictorial form, closer to grasping the meaning behind a language than reading its individual words. The images used in imagination were meant, eventually, to be seen through rather than held onto. And beyond that, intuition, in which the boundary between the knower and the thing known becomes provisional, the most demanding of the 3, and the furthest removed from ordinary forms of verification. Steiner treated these 3 stages as cumulative, rather than alternative paths, each building the capacity the next would require, which is part of why he insisted the process could not be rushed or achieved through a single technique practiced in isolation. 2 exercises illustrate what this training actually looked like. In the seed exercise, a student observes a seed as a physical object, then, without abandoning that observation, holds in mind the developmental sequence latent within it: germination, root, stem, leaf, flower, decay, and the possibility of new seed, as a single continuous form rather than a sequence of separate stages. The aim was not to daydream about future growth. It was to hold perception and disciplined imagination together long enough that growth itself might be experienced as one unified process. The second is the rose cross meditation, a dark cross held in the mind's eye, black symbolizing the purified, quieted lower nature, surrounded by a circle of red roses, red standing for desire transformed rather than suppressed or indulged. The exercise was meant to train the same controlled symbolic imagination the seed exercise trains, using an image that had no direct counterpart in ordinary sensory experience. Steiner was insistent that none of this could be attempted safely without parallel moral development, patience, equanimity, honesty about one's own motives. A mind capable of vivid inner imagery, but lacking this groundwork, he argued, would be far more likely to mistake wish or suggestion for genuine perception than to achieve anything reliable. This is the same problem, from a different angle, that runs through his entire method. Physical experiments produce results that strangers, with no stake in the outcome, can check using shared instruments. Steiner's method produces inner experience, reported afterward in language, verified chiefly by other people who have already undergone the same training and share its expectations. A community of trained observers reaching similar conclusions could mean the method works. It could also mean the training itself shapes what practitioners expect to find, long before any of them sit down to look. Disciplined attention may well sharpen perception. Whether discipline alone can distinguish a genuine spiritual perception from a deeply convincing internal construction is not something the method demonstrates from the outside. Steiner would have answered that only long practice qualifies anyone to judge this, which settles the question for a practitioner and leaves it entirely open for everyone else. Steiner also believed human consciousness itself had not always worked the way it does now. In his account, older forms of human awareness experienced the natural world less as a collection of separate objects to be measured, and more as something charged with direct symbolic and spiritual meaning, participation rather than observation. A tree, on this account, was not first a specimen to be classified, and only secondarily a source of meaning. The meaning was part of how it was perceived in the first place. Modern consciousness gained something real in the process: individuality, rational analysis, the capacity for self-directed thought, unclouded by inherited symbolic frameworks. He did not present this trait as simple decline. His spiritual exercises were designed to recover the lost capacity without discarding the modern one, to add a trained perceptual faculty back onto a mind that had already become sharper and more independent than it once was. Steiner extended the same method into what he called the Akashic Chronicle, the claim that past events leave spiritually perceptible traces. He did not describe it as the simple cosmic database later New Age culture would popularize. In his account, access required the same long training in higher cognition, and what appeared were not static records but living impressions. This remained one of his most difficult claims to verify, because the evidence stayed available only to observers who had already accepted and practiced the method. Steiner eventually broke with the Theosophical Society, partly over its promotion of the young Jiddu Krishnamurti as a coming world teacher. The split also reflected a deeper difference. Steiner wanted to build an independent, Western and Christian esoteric system around his own method of spiritual investigation. The break led to the formation of the Anthroposophical Society at the end of 1912, establishing an independent movement around Steiner's teaching. The practical projects that followed were not separate hobbies bolted onto this philosophy. Waldorf education, first established in 1919 for the children of workers at a cigarette factory in Stuttgart, assumes a developing child passes through stages of consciousness that call for correspondingly different kinds of teaching at each age, rather than one method applied uniformly, regardless of a child's development. Biodynamic agriculture treats a farm as a living, self-regulating organism to be worked with, rather than a set of isolated chemical inputs to be optimized separately. Anthroposophical medicine, architecture, and art extended the same logic outward, each based on the assumption that living systems could not be fully understood by examining their parts in isolation. Steiner never proved that disciplined thought opens onto a world beyond the senses, but his deeper question remains. We usually assume that perception ends where the human body says it ends. Steiner asked whether some of those boundaries might also be habits of attention, and whether training attention could change not only what we think about the world, but what we are capable of noticing within it.